Well, hello everyone. Here we are again at the fourth of our webinar series, which of course culminates in the seminar, which we will hold Saturday week on the 26th in our Hawthorne office. So everyone who's online and who listens to the recordings, which seems to be more the case, are very welcome to attend. We will obviously shoot out some information about that in due course. Today's webinar, of course, as we let you know, is about health, but more particularly in the relation of mind-body health. And of course, who better than John Toomey to tell us all about that. John, as you may or may not know, is one of the most sought-after speakers on the subject of health in terms of mind, body, and spirit too, for that matter. So John is obviously was sitting next to me last week as we spoke, but today he happens to be in Orlando, Florida, which is if you probably don't know that apart from his interest in health, John is a would I say avatar master, wizard, whatever it is with Star Edge International, and has an amazing array of knowledge, not just in the way of health, but certainly in the way of consciousness and higher consciousness. And of course, I really have to be thankful to John for the development that I've had in my life as a consequence of my connectivity with John and how he's helped me and guided me through this path and my journey, which has been, of course, 40 years through property, but a large part of that 40 years on, I shouldn't say a large part, but about 20 years of that 40 years has been to do with an interest in probably personal development, because as a salesperson, that's what you tend to do. But now I've drifted into more the understanding that, it's not just about you, it's about your place in the universe. And when we come to that, when you're talking about mind-body stuff, it will be very relevant to say that, we are all connected. And when I say that, some people will probably think, what is he talking about? But the reality is that we are all connected with the same level of energy, or not level of energy, with the same energy. And but I'm sure that John will expand on that and more in due course. So without further ado, let me let John take over and maybe tell you a little bit about what he hopes to cover tonight. And then, of course, we have that opportunity to perhaps for a few questions towards the end, as long as we finished, if you like, by that time. So, John, how is the weather in Florida? Hopefully a little bit better than Melbourne.
Yeah, well, I don't know what it's like in Melbourne, so I don't know whether it's better or not. But it's pretty mild this time of year over here. I mean, Orlando never really gets cold. It's, I suppose the weather's a little more akin to Cairns. So in summer it can get very rainy and very humid, but of course now we're in fall, as the Americans call it, so it's quite mild. Days are warm and the nights are, well, there's not even cool. So, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Melbourne's been unbelievably erratic. Well, again, I suppose that is Melbourne, although we are, for the third year in a row, the most livable city in the world. But the weather is obviously doesn't count for much in that calculation. But one shouldn't complain. I mean, yeah.
In the business you're in, Bertram, it's probably not good to criticise the weather in Melbourne. I wanted to talk this week about, other factors that are non-physical that still have a real impact on our health and well-being. And, I'm not really talking about mental health. I'm talking about, things that are not physical that affect the physical. And last week we talked about the pH balance in the body. And it's incredible how what's going on in your mind can have a huge impact on the pH of your body. For example, laughter is one of the most potent alkalizers that we know of. So when a person has a really good laugh, the chemical responses that happen from that result in an alkalizing effect on their body. And it's very interesting that over the last 50 years, people have tended to become more and more and more serious. And I think seriousness is a huge health risk. You know, we've lost that ability to be playful. And I think if a person really wants to get healthy, one of the first things they need to do is to learn how to become playful again. And I don't mean fake playful, I mean playful. And I think, you know, if we want to learn how to be playful, we need to look at kids. And one of the things that kids do, which is pretty amazing, is that they don't ever seem to lock onto a fixed opinion or a fixed viewpoint on things. They're happy to explore viewpoints. And when they play in different roles, and they don't sort of have too many rules. And this is a big part of being a healthy adult, is to learn to have that childlike curiosity and wonder again in our life and allow ourselves to be more playful.
Yeah. I mean, one of my occupations sometimes when I'm out in public is to actually observe children, particularly children under 5, because from where I sit, you know, you're talking about connectivity and being all connected with oneness. I mean, those kids are just 100% connected to oneness, and just to watch them, you almost get a de facto connection yourself, right, through that kid to the oneness. And it's so amazing to watch, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, kids really get it, and they're not in their minds thinking intensely. You know, kids feel, and they're really aware of what's going on around them, and they're just fully immersed in it. You know, what happens with us adults is we're often outside of things, judging them. Oh, that's not right, or that should be different. And, you know, we're really locked in this viewpoint that once we're in a fixed viewpoint, we can only judge things, as opposed to learning how to get really flexible in our minds to see things just as they are and enjoy them.
Is it fair to say that a large part of that perhaps is to do with the, shall I say, the ego mind, and where, you know, a child perhaps once they go beyond that 5-year time frame are starting to then develop that ego mind by way of saying, you know, me, mine, I, and that sort of a thing. And that's when that sort of judgment and perception starts to pick up.
Yeah, I think that part of it, yes, I would agree with that, but also, I mean, it's not a bad thing to say me, mine, and that sort of thing, but I think when it becomes really solid and fixed, it becomes a problem, and maybe that's one of the downfalls of modern education, that we really, instead of teaching kids how their minds work, we just fill their minds up with information. Absolutely. And it gets to the point where that's a fact, that's not, that's right, that's wrong, and we start locking into fixed ways of viewing things. Now, sometimes that's helpful because then you and I didn't have to go through the same discoveries that Einstein went through, you know. We could actually learn from what he did, but still, we really don't teach kids how their minds work. So as they go, they really develop into that I'm right, you're wrong type mindset. And, you know, once that really locks in, it becomes very difficult to then revert back to what kids naturally do, and that is to be an explorer. You know, and one of the things that I've been able to relearn is to sit down with somebody who has a different viewpoint to me. Instead of asserting my viewpoint and arguing against their viewpoint, what I can choose to do is to get really interested in their viewpoint so that maybe I will learn some things that I didn't know before. You know, sometimes people have got some pretty extreme viewpoints, and it's very easy to immediately and automatically resist their viewpoint. But it's so much more fun to just get interested in it and find out what's really contained in all of that. And the amazing thing is that when somebody is really interested, it then allows the person who's got that fairly hard, fixed sort of viewpoint to actually explore their own viewpoint, because they're not having to defend anything because they don't feel like anybody's trying to make them wrong. It's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, I'm reminded actually of DVD that Harry Palmer I watched just last week, where he talks about mind consciousness and heart consciousness or spirit consciousness, and how I think we touched on this last week also, where you really have to have a balance of the two, because you can't be just totally locked away in this spirit consciousness where you're in la la land, so to speak, and then you can't be totally locked in mind consciousness where you become just totally no heart whatsoever, and you really don't give a staff about anybody or anything, and you just want to go there and do what you want to do. When you're talking about mind-body balance, and spirit comes into it also, isn't that very relevant?
Well, absolutely. And people talk about work-life balance. It's got nothing to do with work-life balance. It's about that balance between the head and the heart. And if they find that own balance within themselves, well, then their work-life balance will just sort itself out. And it's cool that you mentioned Harry, because Harry really, he's the guy who really understands it, and his teachings and his materials and his tools are a wonderful thing that any person can use to really get back into control of their mind and really get outside of their mind, so that they can watch their mind instead of being lost inside it.
I was going to say, it sort of like comes back to that issue of what we were discussing about, the indoctrination, if you like, and that sort of mindset that we've all been traditionally thought to have, which comes down from one generation to the next. But how many people sit there and question whether that is valid or not valid? And more particularly in my life, when I go out talking about health and wealth and well-being, but let's say we talk about wealth and wealth creation through, say, property, and people say, but what you're saying is not what I've been told for the last 15, 20 years. And I'm saying, yes, well, I was saying that before, but I'm not saying that today, because I've questioned it, I've thought about it, and I've changed my mind. Why don't you?
Yeah, well, sometimes it could be frightening when you've been holding onto a viewpoint for 20 years. It can be frightening to change it, especially if you've beaten a few people around the head with your viewpoint.
I'm right.
Exactly.
That's a nice ego way to be, isn't it?
We tend to do that. We think we're right about something, and then we want everybody else to agree. And sometimes the tactics that we choose to do that are probably not that nice. I've done it.
When it comes to mind-body health, as you and I have no doubt discussed, and the mind is so important when it comes to where you sit in the world and your health and your well-being, because as my favorite words come from that musical Time, which Laurence Olivier enunciated probably around the 1980s and late 70s, where it says, your life is an expression of your mind. You are the creator of your own universe. You are free to will whatever state of being you desire through the use of your thoughts and your words. And there's great power there. It can be a blessing or a curse. It's entirely up to you. and that those words ring true for me 101%. And when you come back to that mind, body, health and wealth and well-being, isn't it all starts and ends here? And we talked about mind consciousness, but when you were saying just before about the mind and the heart connecting and being as one, that's when it all starts to happen, isn't it?
Well, Professor Dean Ornish, who is a professor of cardiology out of Stanford University, back in 1986, he had been studying with some yogis, and they had a different viewpoint on heart disease. See, in Western medicine, it was all about diet and exercise and blocked up arteries. In Eastern medicine, they said it was more about the heart chakra. Now, for those of the listeners that don't understand what a chakra is, there's 7 of them in the body. And from an energetic perspective, they're a point where energy converges and dissipates. There's a flow of energy through that part of the body. And the heart is all around emotional energy. And the belief in Eastern medicine was that people who don't open their hearts and express how they feel and allow themselves to feel, that energy can block up around the heart and that flow can stop. And eventually it can manifest as a physical blockage. Now, Ornish thought this was pretty interesting, so he then went back to Stanford and applied to do a major research project, which was accepted. And his first run of the study, he had 22 people who were all lying in hospital waiting for someone to saw their sternum in half and get in there and plumb their arteries because they were very sick with heart disease. And he basically said to them, look, if this program I'm doing works, you might get away with having your chest sawn in half. So, of course, 22 people volunteered, and he put them through this program that was, healthy diet. There was no drugs and no other form of intervention, but they were put into support groups a couple of times a week with a trained facilitator where they really were encouraged to open up their hearts and talk about what they really felt and really explore what they really felt about their lives. And, as we would say in colloquial terms in Australia, they were encouraged to get it off their chest, And at the end of the 12 months, there was a 94% reduction in symptoms of heart disease in those people. And so what Ornish proved for the first time is that when people were given the space to open their hearts literally opened up and the blockages disappeared.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it?
That program was famously called the California Study, and that program is freely available across the US and Canada. Someone who's got heart disease, oftentimes the insurance company will direct them to that program because it's cheaper than bypass surgery. But unfortunately we don't have it in Australia. It's never been picked up. But and the amazing thing is that the incidence of reoccurrence of heart disease in graduates of that program is very, very low. Whereas with bypass surgery, it's still up around 50%. So really, we're starting to look at non-physical things that are actually causing major physical illness.
I suppose, I've simplistically have that view that, emotions were probably at the cause, if you like, or when I say emotions, I'm saying negative emotions were at the cause of ill health, because what is disease is dis-ease. So you're not at ease. So once you're not at ease, and you were talking about the chakra system, the 7 chakras are not humming along like they're supposed to, And that might seem a bit woo-woo for people who are not familiar with it, but let's just use the expression dis-ease. Now, if your kind of guts are churning a lot of the time and you're not happy and you're grumpy or you're angry or your emotions are constantly in like all over the place, you've got to ask yourself the question, how in God's name is that good for you? Because every time you're upset, your body is secreting hormones and all of those things to try and compensate this thing. And of course the body's going, oh my God, this is all too hard, you know? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, and I think here's the really interesting part of it. See, there's a difference between an emotion and a feeling. A feeling's just a feeling. An emotion is a reaction to a feeling. Now, that doesn't mean an emotion is bad, but what happens to us is that because we're all so much in our minds, feelings that are uncomfortable are resisted. So then we have an emotional response to them. And oftentimes then that's resisted. So in the end, the feeling sits there and we haven't let ourselves experience it. But what Harry Palmer discovered and what he teaches so beautifully using his tools, and it's an experiential learning, is you actually get to learn how to let yourself feel a feeling. And you know what happens, Bertram, don't you? When you let yourself feel a feeling, you move through it and it's gone. It doesn't hang around. And you don't have to have this emotional response to it. And this is the amazing thing, because so many self-development programs talk about emotions being the key. They're not. They are a response to the thing that's actually the key. And this is the really cool thing about kids. You watch them, is they feel something, they fully experience the feeling, and then they move on. You know, it's gone.
I mean, there's, my goodness, you know, an hour doesn't seem to be adequate enough to discuss these kinds of things, and that is why we're obviously running the seminar on the 26th, where people can come in and get an expanded version of what we're talking about. So what we're trying to do is give them, if you like, a little bit about what what there is to talk about in this regard. And when we talk about mind-body stuff, John, I mean, the laws of the universe, which have been here since time began, when you start reading about those and then you apply that to the mind, body and illness and all of that, I mean, do you like to make some comment about that?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that, the amazing thing about the human body is that it's made up of atoms. And an atom is made up of protons, neutrons and electrons. And if we look at that, and if we were actually able to blow an atom up to really have a look at how much of it is blank space and how much of it is solid matter, it's about 0.000000001% solid matter. And in quantum mechanics, they're now saying they're not sure whether that solid matter is solid or not. But an atom, in some senses, looks a little bit like the solar system. A whole lot of black empty space with a few bodies floating around in it or spinning around in it. Now, because the body's made up of atoms, it means that there's a very, very tiny percentage of our actual being that is supposedly solid matter, even though it looks and feels, when I touch this, it's pretty hard,
Yeah.
But the reality is it's mostly blank space. And so when we look into there was a mathematician, I read his work several years ago, and it was really fascinating because he said, if you take an atom and look at the amount of space to it compared to the amount of solid matter, he said, if you could take all the solid matter out of all of the atoms that make up the Empire State Building, and you're able to press all that solid matter together, you would finish up with a block smaller than a bag of cement. And he said if you were to take all of the solid matter from all the atoms that make up the collective human race of it, at that time was about 6.5 billion people, and you could press all that together, you'd have enough solid matter to make a thumb. And so the challenge is that when you look at the universe, or even if you look at really, and I mean, I suppose you really would need to explore the avatar materials to really get far enough outside your mind to really experience this, is that underlying presence that is there underneath or through or beyond even the universe. Now, all of that is not, it's not even energy. It's a nothingness.
Yeah.
But then everything else that sits on top of that, we create it. Whether it be our physical bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, all of that. And it tends to be that when we create thoughts or emotions that resist a natural flow, that's when we create dis-ease. When we have thoughts and emotions and feelings that have a natural flow to them, then we are in ease. So there's ease, as you say, and there's dis-ease. And it really comes out of, is there a nice flow, or is there a resistance to a flow?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, huh?
Yes,
And
yes, it is indeed.
And I think that, I just look around me, see kids, when you watch them play, little kids, they're in this flow where they just move. It's very spontaneous, But adults resist all of that. And you watch them as they walk down the street. You can feel them. They've got a tension on themselves, how they look, how they sound, and they're resisting just being playful, being relaxed.
I mean, it comes back to that universal law of cause and effect, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, how many times do you know of a person, I mean, we do it ourselves, they see a job, for example, in the paper, they think, oh, that looks good, so they fill in an application. Now, they fill in the application themselves and they submit the application. They even turn up at the interview and they say all the right things to convince the person to give them the job. Okay? They get the job, they turn up at the job, and within a week they're at the job wishing they could be somewhere else. So what they're effectively doing is they've decided to be somewhere, but then they're resisting being there. So they've got this tug of war going inside where they push-pull against themselves. I think we call it presenteeism, But, people forget to decide. So, okay, you get up in the morning, you don't feel that great, and so you resist going to work. And so you spend the whole day resisting the experience, which is a very negative thing, and you're blocking flow.
Yeah.
But what would happen if the person stopped themselves and said, hang on a minute, what am I doing? I actually chose this. So today I'm going to dive in and I'm going to enjoy the experience of being at work. And it's a whole new ball game then, because now they're not resisting and they can choose to just take it as it comes and enjoy their day. And one of the cool things about that, Bertram, is that when we step into a place in life where we put our attention on the needs of other people and look at how our work has a positive impact on other people, then we can really put our attention on enjoying working out how in our daily lives we can make life better for other people. Then it becomes more fun.
There's the other natural law, the law of compensation, which means that if there is cause and effect, and if you've given value, you're going to get value back. So you get compensated by the natural laws of the universe if you've given of yourself and you're given unconditionally, or maybe even conditionally. It's really not the case, but you're going to get rewarded for that. That's just a natural law.
Yeah, it's a natural flow. It's a natural exchange that occurs. But if your attention is on receiving as opposed to giving, something tends to happen there, and it doesn't, there's more power in give than there is in take. And one of the things I find with some of the companies I go into, Bertram, where they've got a lot of internal stress, one of the first things I ask is, what is the mission of this business? What are you here for? Why are you in business? And invariably, when you follow back, the original reason that business was formed was because somebody came up with a product or a service that they thought would be really helpful to other people. So they went into business to deliver that.
Yep.
And so what then happened was the business got built around that, and it got in motion, and everybody forgot why the business was actually there. It just became an accounting problem and a sales problem and all those sorts of things. Yep. But when the business reconnects with that original mission, and the people within the business reconnect with that, and the person who has got this boring job on an assembly line somewhere gets reconnected with how what they're doing is having a positive impact on another person's life, it shifts everybody's perspective, and all of a sudden what they are doing has value and it feels good.
Now, I was just going to say, coming to the issue of, mind, body, spirit, and health. If someone said to you, okay, in terms of priority, what is in getting my, say, I'm asking, someone says, okay, so in terms of priority, what do I need to do first to get my health organized and my mind, body's in balance?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I reckon sometimes, like I haven't been to a gym for a while, but sometimes I'll go to a gym in the mornings and train in a gym, and I'll see the same thing happening for people. They're there at the gym because they think they should be, but they're resisting the experience. So they're not having fun. And so they think that exercise is what they should do, but they're resisting it so intensely that they're probably not getting a great deal out of it. And from that perspective, that's when you see people start to punish themselves, and starve themselves, and it all becomes a very serious and awful thing. I think that, one of the first things that people really need to do with their health, obviously drinking water is really important and it's really crucial, but learning what they can do to start to break down all that resistance in their mind, I think is crucial. And, you did that resurfacing workshop last year and you reviewed it again last week. Getting some tools like that to just really start to understand how your mind works and break the grip of your indoctrinated thinking and that serious, incessant thinking, I think is a wonderful first step for anybody. And the really cool thing, it doesn't matter whether you're the most unfit person on the planet or the fittest person on the planet. Those tools can be used to take yourself to the next step.
I mean, as Napoleon Hill, I think he said, what the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And yet, when I say that, I'm also thinking to myself, well, where does spirit come into that? Because, when we talked about mind consciousness, spirit consciousness, it's not just about thinking, isn't it? You've got to think from your head, but you also have to think from your heart.
Yeah, and I think that spirit is playful. It's not serious. It doesn't worry about the creations of the world, But, when the mind takes over, sort of that spiritual part of us just drops into the background and doesn't really get much of a say. And I think, what Napoleon Hill said was right. But then I suppose what Harry Palmer added in there, which was so helpful for me and for thousands of others, is that you can be trying to create a new belief in your mind. And that belief might be, for example, money comes to me easily. Okay? Now that might be a belief that I really want to entrench in my mind. But the problem is, sitting underneath that, out of the view of my rational mind, is another belief that says, other people have money, not me. And so what will happen is that all that I will probably experience is seeing a lot of money in the world, but none of it coming to me. And then, of course, I throw away my Napoleon Hill book and go, well, that stuff doesn't work, But the reality is that I was trying to make a new belief over the top of another belief, and there's a difference in certainty. The hidden one underneath is running at 100% certainty. The other one's running at 70%. Guess which one's more powerful? And I say to people, it's a bit like trying to build a hotel on a swamp. The foundations are too unstable and it's not going to stand up. So learning the tools to deeply inspect your consciousness and uncover those beliefs that are already there that are really unhelpful is so freeing and so exciting. And really, it gives flexibility back to the mind where you can decide from there what you really want to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been thinking about that issue of, like, for instance, people talk about, oh, I know I'm going to get a parking spot wherever I go out. And sure enough, we found a parking spot. And yet, someone might think, I really want to have a great relationship in my life. It just doesn't work. So, what's the difference?
Yeah, well, see, the amazing thing about a parking spot, I once heard a very funny joke about a man who was deeply religious and extremely obese. And his problem was the donut shop between home and work. He loved donuts. And he used to go there every day and have breakfast with donuts and take a bag with him to work, you see. And he realised that if he wanted to lose weight, he had to stop going to that donut shop. And so he did, and he was doing really well. He'd lost a lot of weight. And one morning on the way to work, he thought, oh, I'd love a donut today. I would just love a donut. And he said to himself, okay, well, if God wants me to have a donut, there'll be a parking spot outside the donut shop. And sure enough, on the 9th time round the block, there was a parking spot. And I think, the parking spot phenomenon is a really interesting one, Yeah, okay, I'll find a parking spot. But sometimes we drive around looking for it for a bit. But really when it comes down to, and we know that parking spots are becoming available all the time, it's a fairly dynamic one, but a relationship is something that we actually have to commit to. And once we get in there, all of those unhelpful beliefs start to play their part. And then pretty soon, from the perspective of those beliefs, we start hitting the right and wrong game. And when that happens, all bets are off. It can get pretty funky from there. But if we go in there with more of an understanding of how our mind works, we can get really interested in our own viewpoints and where those beliefs are popping up. And we stop having that clashing of viewpoints, and things can start to change. But then there's another thing. If we've got experiences that we've got deep in our consciousness that we've been resisting for our whole life, and we haven't yet learned the lessons from them, we will keep attracting those experiences until we learn the lessons and uncover the unhelpful beliefs that create them. And sometimes for us, it's our relationship with other people, it's our romantic relationships, or it's job situations, or it's money, where we keep recreating those experiences. And for a lot of people, it's about their close, intimate relationships, where there's something resisted deep in their consciousness that they haven't yet been able to shine enough light on to get the lessons and fully integrate it. And when we do, we stop creating those relationships.
I mean, I just seen Fun put something on Facebook the other day, and it said, chocolate makes your clothes shrink. And but I'm reminded of the fact that, chocolate, pretty much solves most problems for sure, but it also does make you put on weight. But from what somebody has told me more recently is that commercial chocolate production is really not that great for you, but if it's organic and it's cacao produced properly, it can be, it does secrete more serotonin and stuff into your body and stuff, which can be really good. But I remember this, sorry?
They're good beliefs.
But I remember this friend of mine who was extremely overweight, and there was a bowl of chocolate, like all broken up pieces of chocolate, and she said to me, "You know something? Once I've eaten one piece of chocolate, I cannot stop eating the rest." And I went, "Okay, I think I now understand why you're overweight, because you've programmed yourself to believe this." And as we're talking about a belief, that's her belief, and that's how it is, right? Am I right in saying that?
Well, yeah, exactly. It's like her belief is, I can't stop.
So we can have helpful beliefs or not helpful beliefs. It's really up to ourselves to get that thing working.
Yeah, and it can be something weird, Bertram, like a person who's not very athletic might have carried the belief from school, something like, I'm not very sporty. And that belief will stop them engaging in exercise. Or they'll resist exercise because they're not very sporty. It's amazing, But when they really get outside of that...
I mean, it's really quite fascinating when you go into that area of, how we take something and perceive the comment to be what it is and then make something of it, and all of a sudden it becomes a belief that we hold. And yet when you go back and with the work more recently that I've been doing with yourself, with Avatar and stuff, I mean, you start to look back on stuff, and what you thought was so true, all of a sudden you have a totally different viewpoint and you realize there was a lot of rubbish. And you've been carrying this stuff for years, and life's been reacting to your thought process. And had you not carried that, it would have been a totally different result.
Amazing, huh? But that's why it's so cool to really explore those beliefs and have fun exploring them, and not dive in with an expectation of what you might find. Because, again, when you use Harry's tools, the Avatar tools, you actually go in there as an explorer, and it can be gobsmacking what you find, the beliefs that you hold, and it's so clear when you find them and you realize how irrational and insane they are. But we take those beliefs on at a time when we are quite irrational, And it's so cool because, you know, then once we discover them, they can integrate and they no longer dictate our viewpoint. And our mind frees up. And it's easier to take on new viewpoints and new beliefs.
I mean, simplistically, when it comes to that mind-body connection and how we make our way in life, a friend of mine said to me one time, he said, "You know something, Bertram? I just cannot sleep at night properly. I keep waking up at 3 o'clock and I cannot sleep." And I said, "Do you know why?" He said, "No. What did you just tell me?" He said, "I keep waking up at 3 o'clock every night and I can't sleep properly." I said, "That's the reason." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You believe that you're going to wake up every night at 3 o'clock. What do you think is going to happen?"
Yeah, and the other belief was, I can't go back to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like as soon as he would wake up, this disaster thought goes through his mind of, well, that's it. Well, you know, I reckon one of the most exciting things, Bertram, is that, you know, if your alarm's set for, say, 4:15, you've got to get up at 4:15, and you wake up in the night and you look at the clock and it's only 1 o'clock, you go, yes! 3.5 hours to go. It's like, wow, how cool. People have used meditation for years to try to help them establish in a viewpoint that is beyond their mind. In yoga, they call it the witness viewpoint. And it's a higher self viewpoint. Now, higher self doesn't sleep, you know, and really, again, this is part of the work that we do in the Avatar course, is learning how to get to the point where you can live your life where that viewpoint is always awake. It's always just sitting there in the background and it's awake. And it's watching your mind, and it's fun because you get to see what your mind does, you know. And it keeps you aware enough so that you don't get lost in your mind or fall into the normal patterns and reactions of your mind. And a big part of that is sleep, you know. Really, you know, getting the mind to let go of enough control and resistance so that everything can relax and a person can sleep.
Sure. Actually, while we're on the subject, we're nearly out of time. And of course, we talked to this. Probably not enough time for questions. But what I want to say to people is they can always email or more particularly come to the seminar on the 26th. But then because we can talk and certainly answer all the questions that anybody would like. But before we go, I just want to say, Dr. McCullough, and I read some talk puts out there on the internet, but he says that talking about sleep, that 7 to 8 hours, you shouldn't sleep more than 8 hours, and you shouldn't sleep less than 7 hours. Could you go along with that?
Well, see, I think more than 8 hours, he's correct on that one. But I think that what happens, and what Joe McCullough probably may not have explored yet, is what happens when the mind really lets go. Because when it gets to that point and the mind really goes quiet and you stop resisting your life on so many levels, your fatigue levels are less. And I know from my personal experience that since I've done all this work, and again, it's pretty much exclusively been using Harry Palmer's tools, you know, the Avatar tools, I've been able to get to the point where my mind is quiet enough where I live my life and I'm not resisting experience, that I can survive really well, really comfortably on less than 5 hours sleep every night. And I train hard, you know, I train physically very hard because I love physical exercise, but I go to bed and I drop into a very deep sleep, and the sleep's really good quality, and I get up, and I have I suppose a bit of a routine. I get out of bed at 4:15 every morning, and I don't find it hard to do that. And it's really cool to just be in that place where the sleep is so good quality that you actually don't need that much of it. Now that may not be everybody.
Well, thanks, John, for your participation again. We're really, really grateful for you sparing the time, especially at this hour of the morning in Orlando, Florida. And I truly, from the bottom of my heart, say a big thank you on behalf of all our people who listen in, and more particularly to the people who even listen in to the recordings, which seems to be getting more and more popular, which we're very grateful for. And we look forward to seeing you obviously in Melbourne on the 26th for our seminar, where we'll talk more and more and more about this very, very interesting subject of health, wealth and well-being. So thank you once again, and hope you have a wonderful trip and a very safe travels back home, and we'll see you soon. And we'll see everybody out there in internet land soon, and hopefully some of you in our office on Saturday week. So thank you for listening, and namaste, as they say, which is I see the God in you. And thanks, John. All the best.
Thank you, mate. Take care. Bye now.
See you later.